start. Sorry we're a little bit late, but we were on the floor a while. We have another new audiovisual person, John Tay, I think. Can you go and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chairman. My name is John Tay. I am with the Broadcasting Services team here to make it all happen for you guys.
Well, thank you very much for being here, and we hope you stay. I guess we'll try to be friendly to you. The others, didn't make it.
I appreciate that, Chairman.
Right. Sutton's missing.
Right. We're going to have to do a call in the house for Sutton.
Call the house.
All right. We're going to go ahead and open the hearing on HB 2450, and we'll start with explanation of the bill. They're not here. This is just not my day. Stand by. For those listening online, we are recessed for a few minutes. All right, so now we're going to open the hearing on HB 2450, and we will start with the explanation of the bill when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. HB 2450 is an economic development proposal. It provides sales tax exemptions for data centers in Kansas that make a minimum investment of at least $600 million. And these data centers also have to meet other requirements, such as new jobs requirements. The exemptions would include sales tax exemptions on purchases of goods and services for construction of the data center, or remodeling of it, the data center equipment, electricity, and other data center costs, certain labor costs. The Secretary of Commerce manages the program. So if you turn to section 1, pages 1 to 2, that's the definition section, the various terms that are defined. Of importance is data center equipment, because that is what all gets the sales tax exemption. And you'll see that that includes computer equipment, as one would imagine, servers and software, modular data centers, but also electrical equipment, cooling equipment, water conservation systems, fiber optics, and other cabling, and for purposes of connecting distributed data center locations, and also monitoring and security equipment and equipment used for administration. Eligible data center costs, that's another term that is eligible for the sales tax exemption. That includes development, engineering, design, acquisition of land or buildings, site improvements, construction, operation of a data center, lease payments, and computer data center equipment. So there is a requirement for new jobs, as I mentioned, which we'll see in a moment, but the definition of new jobs is of importance. It means jobs with a qualified firm at the qualified data center or directly associated with the data center, filled by Kansas residents and with the primary work locations in Kansas. Qualified firm, the firm that gets the sales tax exemption if it meets the investment and other requirements, means a business subject to Kansas state income tax that is engaged in data processing, storage, and dissemination. And a qualified data center is one or more buildings that are constructed or remodeled to house a group of network computer servers in Kansas to centralize the storage, management, and dissemination of data pertaining to a particular business or body of knowledge. Section 2 provides the requirements and process for a qualified firm to receive the sales tax exemptions. As I mentioned, there is a baseline requirement of $600 million investment in the aggregate within the first 5 calendar years after commencement of construction of the data center. The qualified firm must also create and maintain at least 20 new jobs at the data center within 2 calendar years after commencement of operations. This is a little bit of a different provision. There's a time lag involved in this bill, and that construction of the project must begin within 10 years of the date of agreement with the secretary. If the qualified firm commits to those requirements, enters into an agreement with the secretary, they would receive a sales tax exemption for the eligible data center costs, data center equipment, all electricity used by the data center, and labor services to install, apply, repair, service, alter, and maintain data center equipment. Section 2 provides a process. If there's a breach, the secretary can require that it be cured within 60 days. If it's not, the secretary can terminate the exemption or suspend the exemption, either all of it or part of it, until the breach is cured. There's some requirements that the qualified firm has to agree to. They have to agree to cooperate with any audit by the Department of Revenue. They have to provide information to the Secretary of Commerce, various information that's listed on page 3 and page 4. There's a provision that the Secretary can inspect books and records pertaining to eligibility, but the Secretary has to give 30 days prior written notice. There is a requirement that the Secretary conduct a review every 5 years of the qualified firm to ensure compliance. And the Secretary has to certify to the Secretary of Revenue that the qualified firm meets the requirements for eligibility for the exemption. Section 2 also provides some exceptions to disclosure under the Kansas Open Records Act for confidential information. And finally, there's a provision that Secretary of Commerce is to certify to the Secretary of Revenue when the qualified firm has met the conditions to receive the sales tax exemption. The bill also grants both the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Revenue the rule and regulation authority. Section 3 provides some additional particulars with respect to the sales tax exemption. That's on page 5. Again, it's the qualified firm is eligible commencing on the date that construction of the data center begins, or an earlier date if agreed with the Secretary. And the length of the sales tax exemption varies on the amount of the investment. If it's $600 million, which is a minimum, the qualified firm gets a 30-year exemption. If it's $800 million, the qualified firm gets an exemption for 40 years. If the qualified firm invests $1 billion, the exemption is indefinite. That's pretty much what the bill does. Section 4 is just amending 793606 to set forth a sales tax exemption. If enacted, the bill would become effective July 1st, 2023.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for the revisor? Representative Dodson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. There's no provision in here that requires the purchase of these materials in the state of Kansas, as I see it. And I think that's the basic question I wanted to ask.
No, there's not.
Excuse me. The other one was along the same lines. There's no requirement for them to use labor in the state of Kansas. Is that true?
No, but just I point out that since it's a sales tax exemption for Kansas sales tax, there is sort of an inherent, assumed concept that they would be purchasing items that require Kansas sales tax.
Right. Thank you.
Representative Clayton.
I guess, thank you. Representative Dodson, you brought up just a question that I had, and that is a lot of the materials that are used to make a data center, obviously the brick and mortar could be produced in Kansas, but do we have any sort of, like chip production here in our state? It might not be possible for all materials for a data center. And that's not a revisor question, so I apologize, but, just put that out there, Mr. Chair.
All right, so Charles, this is sales and use tax, right? So if they bought it out of state, they would pay sales tax in Kansas normally because they're bringing it in and using it here. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And then to Representative Dodson's question on labor, I thought I heard you say something that they have to primarily work in the Kansas location.
With respect to the new jobs requirement, yes. They have to be Kansas residents working with their primary work location in Kansas.
Okay, thanks.
And the other thing I would just point out is that one of the exemptions is electricity. So that's probably of significance.
Representative Hoffman.
So if I'm reading this right, they have to at least spend $600 million. So what about, excuse me, if and I should know this, but I'm not totally sure, but if a company comes in and it's just a small company, they make a little widget of some sort, they have to buy equipment, put, reconstruct or build a building, maybe $1 million or a couple $1 million investment of equipment, would they pay sales tax?
Yes.
They would.
Yes. They have to make a minimum $600 million investment.
But under current law though, that they would pay sales tax. That's what I'm trying to make sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are various exceptions under current law. I'd have to go back and check all those, but other than this, I mean, this bill would not apply to them.
Right.
There may be
construction costs and things like that.
Right.
They pay sales tax. All right.
Representative Osman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do we define whether somebody's actually spent $600 million? Based on this, we have 10 years in order to start the construction. They have 5 years to finish the construction. And then they have a 30-year time period in which to spend $600 million. At what point are we verifying that they have spent the money that they're claiming to have spent up front?
So under the language of the bill, the Secretary of Commerce has administrative authority over this program. So that would be up to the Secretary to keep tabs. They do have to review them, review the firm every 5 years, make sure they're in compliance. They do have to certify to the Secretary of Revenue, that they're in compliance. But ultimately, I guess, in answer to your question, it's if the Secretary of Revenue decides that they've made the $600 million investment based on the agreement that they enter into with the Secretary.
All right, thank you. So the Secretary can decide that they have made the $600 million, but there's no verification as to when they haven't. They can continue throughout the 30-year period to have a promissory note of, I will spend $600 million at a later point in time.
I believe the requirement for the investment, there is a time frame for it. And yes, it's within the first 5 calendar years after commencement of construction of the data center. So as you pointed out, you've got sort of that window of 10 years that you can begin construction, but you have to make that investment within the first 5 calendar years after you begin construction.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So are the provisions in here, somebody had said something about sales tax on utility bills. This would not affect that. Businesses pay sales tax on their utility bills now.
They do, and this bill would give them an exemption.
Oh, my God. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. I apologize, committee. I'm so sorry about that.
He's listening. Representative Pro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Charles, I want to make sure I understand. So going back to Representative Osman's line of questioning, the 30 and 40 and indefinite period of tax exemption, that's not going to just include initial construction. Is that for like replacement of equipment in an ongoing fashion?
Yes.
Okay.
Representative Dodson.
Just real quick to follow up on the labor. When we build the data centers, typically the load is on the front end. That is, a lot of the expense is the labor that's brought in for construction. After they're done, the labor requirement inside a data center is pretty low. So then the big cost is electricity after that. So that's why I was concerned about how we do labor, because we've got a lot of folks that need those jobs now. And creating new jobs is the thing inside, once you get up and operational, but probably the biggest load of jobs is the people that build the thing.
All right, seeing no further questions. Thank you very much. Good job. We'll open the proponent section. Paul Snyder. Welcome to committee.
Good morning. Paul Snyder with Kansas for Lower Electric Rates. I didn't expect to be first, so excuse me for not jumping right up. So electricity was in the title of this bill, and that garnered my attention. So first off, we support the underlying bill. Getting data centers to Kansas would be helpful to all the utility customers, and that's because data centers are big energy users. And when we have more usage on the grid, we can spread the cost amongst more people. So, and we have studies to back this up. The big 2019 rate study bill that was done validated this as well, that large industrial energy users have a beneficial impact on all customers. So just on that basis, I think this is a worthwhile industry to attract to Kansas. But, and as it's been mentioned, the exemption for electricity is important for data centers, but I think it's important for all commercial customers, and that's what I would ask this committee is to consider exempting the state portion of the sales tax on all customers for electricity. Currently, residential customers do not pay sales tax, state sales tax at least, for energy usage, but many customers do. Grocery stores, restaurants, warehousing, microbreweries, little widget makers, etc. But there are a lot of folks that don't pay that. Ag use is exempt. Nursing homes are exempt. Domestic violence shelters, education entities, government entities, oil drilling, irrigation of crops, nonprofit hospitals, museums, zoos. Religious organizations, we've exempted a bunch of folks. And it's really the smaller, I'm not necessarily going to say just mom and pop because it's more than that. But we've left, a lot of these smaller folks paying for these things. And then manufacturing is also a big one. So a lot of the folks that I represent on a regular basis, they already get a bunch of their sales tax exempted because they're manufacturing and that, so their end product is taxed. But there's a lot of these folks that don't have that opportunity. 3 years ago, we exempted state income tax for utilities. And so that generated a savings for all customers at about 1% to 2%. Of course, exempting the electricity would be 6.5%. So it would be a real savings. In Kansas, you just heard on the floor, Kansas is a high cost energy state. So this is another way that we can help attract businesses, and it would obviously help data centers looking at this and might not need, to look at total investment levels. They just know that when they came to Kansas, that they would have a break on their electricity. So be happy to answer any questions, but that is my request to the committee that if you move forward with this bill or other bills, look at including an exemption on electricity use for commercial customers. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Any questions? Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Paul. Supposing we did that, do you have any idea how much that would cost?
I don't exactly. There was a bill that was passed by the Senate last year and one that was passed by the Senate Tax Committee earlier this year. Those bills focus on all energy usage. So it's electricity, natural gas, propane, wood burning stoves, and a couple other things. And that total is about $55 million a year. This, my focus is, I think it's good to exempt it all, but my focus is electricity. I would guess that's easily at least half of that. So probably maybe closer to 2/3.
Representative Williams. Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right. So, Paul, have you ever been in our appropriations room?
I have not, thankfully.
We spend a lot of money. I haven't seen us lower our spending in the 9 years we've been here. My concern is, as someone that really, really doesn't like sales tax exemptions, because it dissolves the base. And, our base needs to expand so more people pay into it. If we take that off, I understand that you believe that it would be a cost savings for the rest of us. But actually, that would be $50 million, or I would think substantially more in potential sales tax that we would no longer have for our sales tax base. So our sales tax base would get smaller, and eventually we all would pay more because the Kansas legislature never stops increasing spending. So I guess my question is, how would taking away the cost from businesses and shifting it to everyone else save taxpayers money?
Well, I think that the first premise that I would offer is that I don't know if there's any shifting needed, just given the state of the budget right now and the funds that are available. I think that's one of the reasons this was brought up last year was certain legislators thought that there was room in the budget to accommodate something like this, just like with the food sales tax or other items. And I think the important part is, I went through that list, just equalizing who gets this and who doesn't. Right now, we've got scores of organizations that have come and requested carve-outs for their particular little industry, and perhaps the better way is just to look at, broadly all customer classes.
Okay, I guess I see it as a complete tax shift because we do not stop spending money, and this amount of extra money we heard in our committee what may happen in the out years, which are very likely to happen, and that a few $1 billion surplus is going to turn into a few $1 billion of no plus. So anyway, I appreciate your testimony.
Any further questions? Can you tell us the theory behind the study that you had done, that if we bring in large manufacturers that use a lot of electricity, how that affects someone also paying the same electric company? How does it lower the rates for everybody if the demand's greater?
Okay, so the general example, and let's see if I assume Evergy, for instance, an electric company, they've got $1,000 of costs that they need to recover from customers. And collectively, their customers use 100 kilowatt hours. If you divide 1,000 by 100, that's $10, basically. Well, now all of a sudden you have a data center come up. You still have that $1,000 of cost, but you maybe have $125 of use, or 125 units of usage. You divide that again, now your rate's down to $8. So that's the simple theory. That's a pretty drastic example of what could happen. But in general, when you get more, especially big players, are just shouldering more of the load for all customers.
All right, thanks. I'm looking forward to the $8 electric bill.
Me too.
Any further questions? Representative Dodson.
We had a talk with the Evergy guys just the other night, and one of the things that came up was capacity and how much power we shed from day to day now. And you have any idea about, let's just say, an average 600 million data center, how much it pulls?
I really don't. So I hesitate to guess. I used to work for a utility, but I hesitate to guess. I will say data centers are attractive because they use pretty much constant load 24 hours a day. And so it's something the utility can plan on and bank on, and you don't have the peaks. They're not closed on weekends, et cetera.
Yep, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Seeing no further questions. Next up, we have Steve Del Blanco from NetChoice. He's on WebEx.
Chairman Tarwater, members of the committee, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic, thank you. My name's Steve Del Bianco. I'm president of NetChoice. We're the leading trade association of America's leading online companies, and I apologize for having to do this testimony remotely. I am out of the country this week for internet governance meetings. I also apologize for my overly long written testimony, but there is in there a lot of backup there for just my simple pitch to you. And that is to ask for your support of HB 2450 in order to open Kansas for the kind of large-scale, big capital investments and high-tech jobs that come with large data centers. The data centers belonging to NetChoice members, Amazon, eBay, Apple, Expedia, Google, and Meta, are what enable Kansans to find information, to create and connect with each other, buy and sell online, to navigate their world, and to maintain their memories and all those stored messages, documents, photos, and videos. And all of us in this room are saving more and more photos and videos every day, and very few of us ever delete the old ones. So our companies are having to add more data center capacity every year. And that's why my industry leads America in capital investment, more than telecom, energy, manufacturing, or even pharma. And data centers are the essential production equipment to deliver those services. So our members are eager to see whether Kansas would like to join other states in trying to attract large enterprise data centers. Kansas has a deep talent pool. You've got affordable land, reliable energy, good airports, and you have strong community, local community partners. So what's missing for Kansas? Well, the sales tax exemption that Kansas already offers for equipment in other capital-intensive industries like manufacturing and agriculture, well, that doesn't apply to data centers today. And the fact is that no enterprise data center is located in Kansas or in any state that imposes sales tax on data center equipment. Now, a bit more about the large enterprise data centers that we're talking about here. On page 2 of my written testimony, there's an aerial photo of Meta's data center campus just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And the initial structure there is about the size of an aircraft carrier. It's 1 million square feet and costs $750 million. The construction there brought $250 million into the local supply chain, things that were bought locally, pursuant to one of the representatives' questions, and 1,200 construction workers earned about $80 million in wages. And again, that's all local. Now, across the street, Google's building a $600 million data center on another 440 acres. Our members' data centers contribute significantly to local taxes. We are the strongest supporters of education and broadband expansion in the communities that we put in. And the jobs that are created in engineering, technician, electrical, and construction earn very competitive salaries. The data center jobs themselves average over $100,000 a year for roughly the 100 individuals that work in a completed data center. Now, we commission studies in Iowa and Nebraska that document how their data center incentives delivered big economic benefits, increased tax revenue, and jobs. Now, those data centers are the driving force in developing new renewable energy resources in those states, as well as upgrades to utilities and internet infrastructure necessary to deliver to the data center. And all of those costs are borne by the data centers and their partners and not by the states. And moreover, the data centers, they generate new incremental income and business taxes, as well as sales taxes on non-exempt purchases and a tremendous amount of local property taxes. And for that reason, we encourage Kansas to adopt a here versus not here fiscal analysis. The tables I have on pages 4 and 5 of my written testimony list those economic and tax benefits that would accrue if Kansas decides that you'd like to attract a large enterprise data center. You spend nothing, but if you enact this legislation and get in the game, if we show up and build an enterprise data center, there are only incremental new benefits. Now, I read the fiscal note that came out earlier today, and the fiscal note suggests that there's foregone sales tax. But the truth is that if you don't enact the exemption, we wouldn't be here in Kansas, and therefore there isn't anything that's foregone. Idaho's legislature adopted this here versus not here analysis in the fiscal note for their 2020 law, where they said the passage of their bill would have a positive impact on the general fund because it generates new taxes. And though this bill allows a sales tax exemption, the legislation is prospective and is intended to attract business investment not already present in Idaho. And I don't know whether fiscal notes in Kansas can take that sort of approach, but it was very successful in Idaho, and there are already $2 billion worth of data centers announced to be constructed there. I'll close by saying that unlike a decade ago, when only 5 states had tax policies welcoming to data centers, today there are 32 states with sales tax exemptions, as seen in the map on page 6 of my testimony. So you are among the 5 states in the center of that map who are still imposing sales tax on data center equipment. And that's why there are no large-scale data centers here. And the lack of data centers does not impair Kansas' ability access their cloud services that I talked about earlier. The internet connectivity we have works that magic. But your current sales tax policy does deny Kansas communities the chance to attract a large data center and its high-tech jobs. I look forward to your questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. So we all know that all of our different states have different economic incentives, a different set of tools in their toolbox, if you will. So Kansas has HPIP programs where we give 10% tax credits. We have the Jobs Creation Fund that can give millions of dollars incentives. We have PEAK, which provides 95% of payroll withholding tax back to companies. We have property tax exemptions for when you actually make your investment. Usually local entities will provide 10 years of property tax exemptions. If you layer all of those economic incentives together, they are very significant in Kansas. So I guess my question to you, are you looking at all of the other incentives that Kansas has to offer and concluding that you would take those plus a new incentive in order for Kansas to be competitive with the other incentives that you receive in other states?
Thank you, Representative Williams. The truth is that our companies are not even looking at Kansas because of the sales tax burden on the servers. Earlier, we talked about the level of investment that's necessary, and in spending $600, $800, or $1 billion on a data center, about half of that are the servers themselves. And what very few people understand is that every 3 to 5 years, our companies replace all of the servers in the data centers. We do so to put in servers that have higher capacity, that store more. They run on less electricity. They generate less heat, and cooling costs are significant. And they run faster, so we can retrieve our files and videos more quickly. So every 3 to 5 years, we're spending about half of our initial capital cost on additional server refreshes. In addition, the cooling equipment, power conditioning and delivery equipment, and security systems are often refurbished and upgraded. So there's an ongoing cycle, and it could last decades, over which sales tax on all of those items becomes a non-competitive burden. So without the sales tax exemption that's described here, Kansas wouldn't be competitive, and the companies are not currently evaluating Kansas among the candidates. So that is why the sales tax becomes the threshold item. I think the gist of your question also said that if our companies were to come to Kansas, are you concerned that they might try to avail themselves of existing programs like the ones you described? And if so, I'd like to understand whether that's something that, are you seeking to have us articulate in advance which of those we'd use? Because that will take some doing, and companies are currently not looking at Kansas.
Well, I think you answered the question, and I think you're not looking in Kansas. And so those other things that I mentioned are variables that I'm not asking of you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sir, so in your experience, when a data center is constructed and fully operational, what is the expected number of new jobs on a $600 million facility or a $600 million investment that is provided for this facility?
Thank you, Representative. The numbers are roughly 100 on average, 100 employees, full-time employees. There are far more consultants that are brought in to do maintenance, repair, and upgrades. But day to day, there'll be 100 full-time equivalent, and their average salaries are in excess of $100,000. That is experience that we've been able to deliver in virtually every community when we build a data center that's in the neighborhood of $600 million and up. Those jobs are taken from the local economy as well. They're not engineers per se. A lot of them are just technicians or folks that emerge from trade schools that are trained by our companies to be able to handle the care and feeding of all the servers and systems in the data centers themselves.
Thank you very much. That's kind of what I assumed that was based on your testimony. I just wanted to confirm that in the bill that's in front of us, it's asking for any The qualified data center must create and maintain at least 20 new jobs. So is there a particular reason that 20 is the threshold in the bill rather than, say, 100?
Yeah, that's a great question. Companies like Google and Meta, Amazon, Apple, when they build a data center for their own use, those are all employees dedicated to serve that company's servers. But there's another breed of very, very large data centers, which are called co-location data centers. So Representative, those would be a data center that if it met this threshold of $600 million, where tenants from different parts of Kansas would come in and put servers on different sections of the floor. They come in and deliver a rack or a corner of a floor where a bank, a manufacturing, agricultural enterprise would co-locate their servers with other companies from Kansas. So in those respects, that co-location data center itself would have very few employees, since the employees servicing the servers belonging to those banks and agricultural firms are not employed by the data center itself. They're employed by the companies whose servers go in. So we tend to put a threshold in that won't be so high that it would exclude co-location data centers, which are an emerging and a growing part of what serves for the data center industry. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Representative Probst.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony today. In other states where you're located, are you satisfied with a state level exemption on sales tax, or do you pursue other local exemptions on sales tax, property tax, and so on?
Thank you, Representative. In all cases, the sales tax exemption is applied to both the state and the local portion. We have yet to do a data center in a state where the local sales tax would be imposed, but the sales tax at the state level was not. You asked about property taxes, and some localities may from time to time negotiate reductions or caps on local property taxes, but that's not in this legislation. It's neither required, and as I indicated, in most localities, we very quickly become one of the largest property tax payers that they have.
Thank you.
Charles, does this bill eliminate local sales tax as well, or just the state tax?
I believe 793606 applies to both, but I'll confirm that.
Okay, looks like that's right. All right. Any further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
All right, committee. So we have a written proponent from Barbara Comstock. She used to be a U.S. Congresswoman and I think a member of the Virginia Legislature at one point. I'm not showing any new opponents or neutral testimony. Is there anyone in the room that, or are there any other proponents that want to testify today? Not seeing any. Are there any neutral or opponents that want to testify today? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on HB 24. Well, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to...
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you. I just want to apologize again for my comments earlier, and I hope I didn't offend anybody out there online or anywhere else. So thank you.
All right. We're going to close the hearing on 2450. All right, so committee, we're going to go ahead and take up HB 2447. And the revisor will go through what 2447 does.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. As the committee will recall, House Bill 2447 prohibits municipalities, as defined in the bill, from banning products or services otherwise permitted under state law. So a municipality, which means any city, county, or unified city, county government, shall not prohibit any business entity licensed to operate within the municipality from selling any product or service that is otherwise permitted under state law.
All right. Any questions? This should be pretty fresh in your heads. I think we just heard it. So I know that we have at least one amendment on this, and so we'll discuss the bill. And with that amendment, are there any amendments? Representative Patton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee, after hearing the concerns raised by the opponents and the questions raised by committee, I worked with some of the proponents to try to come up with something that I think meets their needs, but also addresses the concerns that were raised. And so I do have an amendment. If Charles can pass that out, I'll talk through it while it's coming. First of all, it eliminates services. So no longer will this apply to services, only products. So I think that eliminates some of the concerns raised by individuals about types of service industries that might pop up next door to your home or your children's school. And then it sets forth a list of items that this act shall not prohibit or restrict a city or county from doing. And those items that are not restricted would be they can continue to set reasonable standards for regulation of alcohol. They can continue regulating consumer merchandise necessary to comply with local building or fire codes. And they can continue to require licensing or permitting of an individual, partnership, corporation, or other business entity. So keep those things, make it clear that municipalities can continue to do those types of things. And then also add in there that nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit or restrict the zoning authority of municipalities. So they can still license, they can still zone, and they still can do things necessary for fire codes, building codes, those types of things. So that's what this amendment does. I would move my amendment.
Okay, Charles, did that description suffice?
Yes.
Okay. So it appears that this amendment addresses almost everything except for the issue of local control.
Correct. I'm sure that's still a concern that municipalities have.
All right. Is there a second on the amendment? Representative Bourgeon, is there a discussion on the amendment? Representative Probst.
So this is probably, thank you, Mr. Chair, this is probably for Charles. I appreciate that we're trying to improve this, or as I previously said, make it less bad. But so I'm remembering back when I was a younger person, they used to sell in one of my convenience stores these little vase, glass vase things that were actually used for drug use. Would anything even in this updated version, if a city decided to outlaw something like that, would they be in compliance with this?
So assuming that sale of that item is all right under state law, looking at the exceptions here, I don't think any of those exceptions would apply to the item as you described. So I think in that case, a municipality could not prohibit sale of that item.
So I guess I want to make sure I'm clear. This talks about if it's permitted by the state, but am I right in thinking that if it's not expressly prohibited by the state, then the city would be powerless also, as long as these qualifications have been met? And we're dealing with fire codes, building codes, things of that nature. But unless there's a specific, if the state is silent on something and a city has an emerging problem in its community and it wants to address it, it would be powerless to do so.
Representative, so in looking at the language of the bill, if you look at lines 7 and 8, the language is from prohibiting, shall not prohibit, rather, from selling any product or service, as the bill is currently written, that is otherwise permitted under state law. So I think a reasonable interpretation of that is otherwise permitted under state law, would not require a specific state provision saying that is permitted.
Thank you.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the former representative's question on that, I think there are, under the Kansas drug paraphernalia laws, all that's addressed clearly.
Perhaps. I guess one of my concerns with this is that people trying to break the law or trying to introduce new products are sometimes inventive, and that's what we saw there. I don't know that what was being sold was necessarily classified as paraphernalia because it had an intended purpose for something else. It was just very well known in the community, particularly among young people, that this was a way to get paraphernalia that wasn't really paraphernalia. And my broader concern is that we are, I think we're creating a situation where if a city is realizing a problem and we have a prohibition on a city taking action, we're going to put ourselves in a spot where then we're going to have to take that to the state level to address it. I understand some of the concerns that are out there about cities, maybe the feeling that cities are being too aggressive. But I think the other side of that is we're going to paint ourselves in a corner where every time a city encounters an issue, because of this, they're going to be hamstrung, and we're going to be sitting here hearing a whole lot of legislation on emerging trends that they don't have the flexibility to address.
Any further questions or comments on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I close and move my amendment.
Committee, you've heard the motion to pass the amendment to amend the bill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say no. Motion passes. The bill is amended. Is there any further discussion on the bill or further amendments? Representative Osmond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wasn't here for the initial meeting, but I was listening online. And so I appreciate the amendment, and I'm glad that it passed because it made the overall structure of the bill better, but it's still a bad bill. Things like fireworks don't seem to be regulated under this. It's not illegal under state law. Puppy mills aren't illegal under state law. Pit bulls aren't illegal under state law, and yet the municipalities might have issues with whether they enter into their city or county. And this will completely eliminate all of that. And I want to remind as well, Representative Probst said in the hearing, this entire bill came about because of a system that ended up working. There was a problem. That problem was addressed at the municipal level. It was solved at the municipal level, but that wasn't good enough. And now here we are at the state trying to create a problem that doesn't exist, and this will be a problem. So I can't support the underlying bill. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none. Is there a motion to pass the bill favorably as amended? Representative Bourgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee recommend House Bill 2447 favorable for passage as amended.
And we have a second. Representative Penn. Any further discussion? Representative Probst.
I'm sorry to belabor this. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I I know when I'm licked, and we're probably going to be licked here, but I'm telling you, we're going down a bad path with this, and I think we're going to create problems we haven't anticipated. I know that this was brought for a very specific thing, but I think that this is going to really tie local communities' hands, and I think we should probably pause and consider what we're creating here.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of passing the bill as amended, say aye. 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 All against, say no.
No.
Was that Representative Shu? Okay. He is in the building. Chair is uncertain. So all in favor, raise your right hand. Representative Shu, you voted no, so everyone else raise your hand that's not in favor of passage of the bill. Motion passes 10-6. That's the last item we have on the agenda for today, so we'll adjourn, but we'll see you tomorrow at 1:30. I think we'll have the unemployment bill ready to go by then, and that's probably all that is on the agenda for tomorrow. Thank you.